It's a brand new metagame. Let's take a look at 10 decks I'm excited to play in this all-new, all-teched-out metagame. I know people are going to be excited about this one. Destroy is legitimately a deck that I thought would have been really good in the previous metagame, enforced by the nerfs to some of the tech cards, or at least a fairly playable one, and the changes to Killmonger kept it from being that, and also forced cards like Mobius, and of course, cards like Stardust into the limelight even stronger than they normally are. Now, Stardust got nerfed, and Mobius didn't, but Mobius is in a little bit of a smaller position because the way the metagame has gone has made it so that there are many more competitors for what a good mid-range deck can actually be. In the previous metagame, the mid-range decks were very sort of one note because there wasn't a lot of pressure on them. There were a few good cards that people could play to tech against them. Those cards would be Mercury, they would be Stardust, they would be Mobius, so you would play a mid-range deck that did points that weren't meaningfully impacted by this. But with the return of Killmonger, more pressures have been added, and now you probably are going to be vulnerable to something because a lot of the things that are just good at doing points without being vulnerable to that, well, they use one drops. A great example of why this matters is when you look at something like the Invisible Woman First Steps deck, which is Black Cat, it is Hydra Bob, there is usually at least another one drop in there, Kate Bishop Arrows potentially. When Killmonger is not around, that deck doesn't have to worry about that stuff, but when there are Killmonger decks that can output points meaningfully, which there are now, you are really vulnerable to that stuff. And that's a deck that runs Mobius and Stardust, but like it is legitimately in trouble if it's going to be counting on those one drops. And Destroy is a deck that does points incredibly well. It should not be lost on you that so many things that say Move does can be disrupted by a Killmonger. This is probably going to put some pressure on Vulture. They're not going to start cutting Aranya, but you can get scams with them if they're counting on an Aranya. I'm not saying this is the best Destroy metagame of all time. I'm not saying Destroy is the best deck in a brand new metagame, but I am saying that it represents the trend of Killmonger decks being legitimately back, and that is really impacting the metagame right now. Which brings us to this list, and it's another version of a Thing First Steps deck, right? I have been evangelizing Thing First Steps and Ghost Spider to basically anyone who will listen for the past, I don't know, week and a half, 2 weeks, however long it's been. I've been way about that. And this is a list that Iris was playing after she moved off of the list that I did a video on because everybody knew about it. And so this list is attempting to do very similar stuff, but it's really the same principle. Your opponent won't know where your stuff is. You have incredible range on the final turn of the game, and all you have to do is make correct reads. Juggernaut, Ghost Spider, Thing First Steps, Mobius, you know what this deck is. This is once again a Mercury, Juggernaut, Mobius, Thing First Steps. Like, that's the deck. It's the same deck. It's just a different points package. I really don't want to dive too far into this, but the reason we're looking for different points packages is it is because of Killmonger, right? Like, this is the kind of thing where if we are counting on ones for our points, and don't get me wrong, we're still playing Batroc. It's a little bit bad, but we can play around that kind of stuff. Whereas, like, if you are looking at, I am literally playing a 1/5 Black Cat, I am literally playing a 1/4 Hydra Bob, you have to assume that stuff is going to live a lot of the time. The more ones you have that matters, the harder it is to play around that Killmonger. And so I think that this deck does a really good job of leveraging really powerful stuff. I do think it's a really cool and awesome deck to play, but it's also verging very hard on just being an actual move deck. Which brings us here to perhaps the most depressing move deck ever created. Yes, that is what you are looking at right now. Yes, there is no Vulture in this deck. Yes, that is related to Killmonger. Yes, we did cut it to get a Mercury in. No, I don't want to talk about it. Yes, this is where we are. This is the place the metagame has found itself. I would not be surprised. In fact, I would be willing to bet that this deck will be the first deck I talk about on my Sunday video. I'm not going to be overly confident in that, but I find it hard to believe that I'm not going to be here. And I talk about this deck a lot for a lot of good reasons, but the main one is really like cutting Mercury from decks, and I just can't do it anymore. And I think that's really indicative of just how powerful this deck has gotten. It is approaching, for me, Hella status. The only thing that keeps it from being Hella status is less consistency in terms of its output. It is still very much reliant on the very specific scalars that it has, but against like small enough mid-range decks, it can just stats and maneuverability its way to victory. It's not going to be favored, but it's not going to be dead. And I think the way this deck ranges from in every game against a mid-range deck to I have the biggest guys ever and you can't interact with them, it's notable. The other notable thing here is, like Ava did in Golden Gauntlet, that there is no Vulture in here. I realize that's not intuitive to a lot of people. We talked about the Killmonger stuff, but it's also just, you are very rarely going to get enough out of a Vulture to justify the investment. You have limited amounts of ability to invest in stuff. You have limited moves, and you need to be putting them into the guys that scale bigger than Vulture does. So it's not just Killmonger and Shadow King, but it is kind of them as well. Everything I've talked about has put some pressure on any Stardust deck actually existing. And I think there are a couple of reasons for this. There are limited slots for tech. So like if you're gonna be a Stardust deck, it's gotta be more relevant to be a Stardust deck than it is to be a Mercury deck. Like in some cases, those are the slots that are competing with each other. And I don't think it's a good choice to run Stardust right now. If that's the choice you're being faced with. If it's like, which one am I picking? You're picking Mercury. It's just a better deck to tech against. And I think that means that Hella's a really good deck right now, probably. Like, I think the metagame is getting a little bit contracted. That's what happens when, like, people are playing Ceratech. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I don't think it's an amazing decision, but I do think it works. And I think that once things like that start re-entering the metagame and people start hard teching against that, because, like, frankly, I think the Iris deck, really any of the Thing First Steps decks, just really dumpster Ceratech really, really, really painfully. Like anything that's in that same mid-range but a little bigger space is gonna take a dump on that deck, but it is good enough to play still, which means that it's harder to justify tech cards that aren't Mobius. Move is so good that it's harder to justify tech cards that aren't Mercury. And so you end up with, you know, the triumvirate of tech cards that we've had holding the metagame together. One of them is a bit on the outs here, and I think that it could be a good idea to try to take advantage of it with some Hella gaming. All right, I mean, so let's talk about it, right? The main thing this deck has going for it is hiding a Killmonger under Invisible Woman. That's just dope. Like, it's pretty gross, right? Like, the Invisible Woman throw prio stuff. I know that Invisible Woman is a card that at least one top player, Derek, really, really despises because it makes the point of playing for priority almost totally irrelevant. I don't think Ceratech is amazing, but I am very impressed with Invisible Woman Killmonger. It's possible there's just a better shell for this stuff right now. You'll notice the Rogue instead of the Enchantress because Enchantress is too expensive now. The numbers you get to are not at all impressive. If your opponent plays Mobius and they are playing anything First Steps Mobius Mercury deck, any one of that Axis of Evil kind of deck, they're gonna beat you down. And I think that's largely the thing that Ceratech has going against it. Like, it's not like, oh my god, I can't believe they did this. They brought back the terror of Ceratech. I think this is like pretty firmly a tier 2 deck, but tier 2 is enough to see play and have an impact on the metagame, and I think it is doing that. Like, this is one of the things that makes me just say, put Mobius in whatever mid-range deck, put Mercury in whatever mid-range deck, have your normal mid-range game plan, beat move, beat whatever's trying to cheat energy. It doesn't have to be Sarah, it can be Mr. Negative, and I think that's really the upside of Mobius, is that it hits so many different things. Anyone trying Warlock, She-Hulk, anyone doing this kind of stuff, anyone doing Mr. Negative, anyone doing Pixie, that's the real upside of Mobius at 3-4. I could be talked into arguing that he should be nerfed, but I don't think that that's not really here or there, except in the context of this deck really gets pounded by that card and you need to rogue it. I think Cerebro 3 is going to find its footing as a very good deck in this metagame. I'm not exactly sure what the specific build will look like, but in terms of force multipliers, I generally enjoy the Madam Web build because it lets you construct Bastion lanes a little bit better than the version with Colleen Wing and Swarm. I think generally I prefer this iteration. I think it will probably be something like this that ends up finally breaking through. And frankly, I think this deck is pretty good. Like, it does matter that it no longer really gets to run Killmonger because one of your ones is a 3. It does matter that you lost Negasonic. But getting Cosmo back is such a big deal. And movable Cosmos off of Madam Web, you'll see that in multiple decks today. It's such a monstrous thing to do. It almost makes me wonder if Cosmo should have been left at a 4/6 because there is just kind of a lot going on here. I know the Iris deck wasn't able to afford getting it in here before, and obviously Cerebro 3 can't play Cosmo if it has 6 power. I wonder if that one might not be something to go back to if they're going to keep Shang-Chi at what his current text is and they're going to keep Enchantress at a 5 cost. It might actually be the right thing to do. Here is another modification of the exact same mid-range shell. And to be clear, I'm very high on this mid-range shell. Everyone should probably know why I'm so high on this mid-range shell if you've watched any of my videos from the last week. This one was created by Big Baby, and the idea here is basically, okay, one thing first steps is awesome. What if we also have a second thing first steps? And that's what the Spider-Man 2099 here is doing. It's important also that this is a deck that has the ability, like, it is very much skating on, I am a mid-range deck, I am keeping your point output down, and you don't know where my cards are going to be on the final turn of the game. I do think personally that he's gone a little bit too far in terms of cutting the Mobius. I think I would probably look very hard at getting Mobius back in here because that's what I do. I don't want to give up those matchups, and I do think there are going to be decks that can do a lot of damage to you. But what this deck also does, and I think this is really notable, is play exactly nothing that actually gets Shang-Chi'd most of the time, like barring Gwenpool hits and weird discounts and stuff. None of your stuff is actually going to get Shang-Chi'd, so you just do what you normally do, right? You do points better than a tech deck. You look at their tech and you point and laugh because their tech doesn't do anything. You blow up some of their cards, you point and laugh because their cards got blown up, and they have no idea where and what your cards are going to be doing. And that's really good. Downside, anything that can just go tall and not care. So Hela is a great example. Mr. Negative is a great example. You instantly lose. Move, even when you don't draw your Mercury, you are very much like, aha, I really hope I hit these destroys. It's not the worst thing you've ever had to try to do, but it is notable that I think we might be a little bit lost in the sauce here, even though I do believe you can win a lot with a deck like this. I think it's very skill intensive. This deck gets to pick up where it left off, and I think that's nice. Like, this is a deck that was poised for a breakout before the patch, basically. It had won Golden Gauntlet. This deck and Morgan Le Fay were two decks in the finals of the Golden Gauntlet, and they were poised for a breakout. And then the entire context that made this deck function got nerfed, and Killmonger got nerfed, which killed Morgan Le Fay. And so two decks that really weren't, like, they were poised to be investigated and maybe break out in the context they were totally removed from that context, and in some cases totally removed from functionality. And I think it's probably worth investigating them because we are heading back in the direction of the context they originally existed in. And the idea here, it might even be a little bit better because when this deck was originally here, it was like, all right, well, what we're going to try to do is not get hosed by Stardust and Mobius that much. But right now, I think there's even less Stardust, and that was the one this deck was more vulnerable to. And so I think that this deck is actually in like a slightly better contextual place than before the patch. The only thing that could change that is it did kind of eat Shang-Chi decks alive, but I think a lot of well-built decks realistically were eating Shang-Chi decks alive, and so that's not unique to it, and I think that can leave it in a fairly reasonable space. Do numbers, your opponent doesn't interact with them, you have no interaction for your opponent, so if you run into move, you are going to die. If you run into Hela, you're going to die. If you run into like Mr. Negative, you're going to die. But you are very, very good at outpointing all of these weird mid-range decks. I don't know what a Sarah deck is supposed to do when they see you other than cry. From Stefan, our high elo chat's resident Arishem / washed gamer. This is 37 card Monty. You know what it is. It is slightly better than Arishem was before the patch, which is to say Arishem tends to thrive in metagames where the best synergies haven't been figured out yet. And that is because Arishem's big weakness is decks that have really powerful synergies because it doesn't really do anything that's incredibly especially powerful. It just plays cards that are above the curve. And so the better the synergy decks are, the more danger Arishem is in, because a good synergy deck is going to go over the top of it. And I think that that is an argument for playing Arishem for like 4 days after a patch, and then we'll see about it later. There's always the argument for Arishem in Golden Gauntlet context with open deck lists. It can be a valuable hidden information tool, and this deck is built to hide information. So I do think that in large part, the more you expect your opponent to know what to play around, the better this deck gets, because they're not going to actually be able to leverage that advantage, because you are the king of hidden information. That said, I mean, the less they have to play around stuff, the less they care about it, right? So again, like, you run into these combo decks and it's like, you need a way to scam or you're just absolutely dead against basically all of them. And that is notable, and it is a genuine downside of Arishem, but I would argue that that is something anyone who plays Arishem already knows, should already know. It is the deck that gets comboed out or gets synergied out, but if people are just playing pure good stuff, you can come out on top. I feel like this is cheating, because I wanted to get a Viv deck in here, but I kind of think this is not the greatest deck for Viv, even though I think it is a good deck generally. And I'm not sure this is the exact perfect thing again, but part of me really likes the idea of being a Scream deck right now, so I have an inbuilt win condition that doesn't require me to play Mercury against the move decks, and just as a mid-range deck, you can generally do some pretty good stuff. I think Scream is in a pretty advantageous position, and chucking Viv in it, I think you might reasonably call me a hack for doing that, but I do think that this is the kind of thing that represents, here's a deck that wants to move a bunch of stuff around. Viv, Hydra Stomper. I'm interested in playing Hydra Stomper right now, for the record. I think as we explore all of these like small package points things that can go with the backbone of Juggernaut, and you know the deal. I've said it like 5 times. Juggernaut, Mobius, Mercury, all that stuff. Same concept here, except we don't need to play Mercury. Maybe it would be better if this was a Mobius. You kind of see where I'm getting, though? Like, I think that there is possibility for Scream to be one of those decks, and I think the more we move towards it, the better off we are. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.